Hi, I'm Chris Santos, and I am here to provide a demo for a blueprint component that I worked on while I was working on Studio Point Blank, which was a cinematics project that I was a part of in the last semester of my graduate program. It was a project where we were creating an animation in Unreal, and this blueprint component that I made creates a camera shake on a Cinecamera actor. This was requested as an alternative to the built-in camera shake tracks that come with Unreal. The reason was because the animators wanted to have more control over the intensity of the shaking over time, and that's just what this component does. First off, to note, it's a component, so the way you start setting it up is you apply it, attach it to the Cinecamera actor that you want to apply the shake to. Now this component, once the shaking is applied, it's applying it to the camera component, not the actor itself. So if you're animating the actor itself, the camera shake will be applying it to this component with its relative transforms. So it shouldn't affect any of your animation that you already have for the Cinecamera actor itself. If you're moving it through the scene or what have you, this camera shake won't interfere with that. So once you've attached it, you bring in the component into the sequencer here on your selected Cinecamera actor. And there's two things you need to do. You need to add two event tracks. One is a trigger track here. You can see the key here where it's triggering. It's calling a function that basically does some setup on the camera shake. It resets the camera shake to its previous state. And here we have a repeater event track that is calling an event that is basically ticking the shaking behavior inside the camera component. So the camera shake is always applied anywhere in the range of this section here, so you can actually make it shorter. And throughout this section, the camera shake is being applied. So how does this work? Well, once you've done that, you can start bringing in these variables that are keyable that are part of the camera shake component. And these variables correspond to the different parts of the transform of the camera component itself. So there's variables corresponding to the X, Y, and Z components of the location, and the X, Y, and Z components of the rotation or roll, pitch, and yaw, respectively, as I labeled them. And for each of those 6 values, you actually have an amplitude and a frequency that you can key. So what is happening behind the scenes is the camera shake component is applying a Perlin noise to these values over time. That's what makes it different from animating these values or keying these values directly, is it is shaking it automatically. You're just changing the intensity of the shaking over time. So the amplitude is basically the severity of the shake. It's actually representing the absolute maximum and minimum range of the shaking relative to whatever the starting value is. So over at this keyframe, I key the amplitude to be 1. And so that basically means once it's at this point here, it will be producing values that are within like -1 or +1 of this starting value. So if it's at 0, it'll produce values between -1 and 1. If it was at 5 for some reason, it would produce values between 4 and 6, and so on and so forth. And the frequency here is basically the speed of the shaking. So the higher this number is, the jitterier the effect is, the more jitter it has. And so one other thing to note is that there is a degree of randomness because of the Perlin noise, but it's actually deterministic. So if you go on the cam shake component here and you go all the way down, you'll see the seed value here. So every time you have the same seed, it will actually recreate the randomness, the camera shake in the same way. If you want to switch it up, get a more random result, you can change the seed, and that will change how the shaking occurs. Or if you like it just the way it is, you can leave this here or write it down if you want to save it and then try out some other values, etc. So I have a demo here where you can see it in action. So the shaking is occurring at a higher rate each time the arm is slammed against this non-existent wall. So you can see down here, I am kind of keying these location values, and it gets a bit shakier around each slam, and then it ramps up during the final struggle here. That's also where I started changing the rotational values. And then it goes back down to 0 on everything to neutral it out. So it's very useful. It's simpler to use than keying the transform values by hand, of course, but it also gives you a lot more control over the intensity over time. And so this was very useful for our animators. It was used in our scene when some rubble was collapsing, and it really added to the feeling of the scene, and I got some nice compliments on it. It was useful.